Hello, and welcome to episode 1 of Terminal Chat. Terminal Chat is a community based, issue focused audio podcast where I, Zoltar, your host, bring in members of the Pantheon community to talk about MMORPGs in general, but especially Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Today I have two guests with me to discuss the Shaman class in Pantheon. But before we get to that, I'd like to go through a bit of information about myself so you guys have a bit of an understanding about who I am. So I grew up playing just about every genre of video game except RPGs. The only RPG I remember playing as a kid was Dragon Warrior on the original Nintendo. And I either rented it or borrowed it. And I remember liking it, but aside from that one game when I was like 9 or 10 years old, I just kind of missed the boat when it comes to classic RPGs, for whatever reason. And later on in high school, everybody in my circle was a Nintendo 64, so it was all about GoldenEye, Mario Kart, and Zelda, which I don't really consider Zelda an RPG. Some people might, but yes. So I just kind of missed the RPG boat, so to speak. And eventually, I went off to college, and it just happens that one day my freshman roommate walks in with this game called Asheron's Call. And we loaded up and started playing it, and it just completely blew my mind. This is same period as EverQuest, 1999, and so the whole idea of the persistent online world was just amazing to me. And I remember killing cows with fireballs, and like thinking to myself, this cow was an actual thing. It existed for everyone. It wasn't just something on my screen or my PC. And I throw a fireball at it, kill it, and now it's dead. It's not dead just for me. It's dead for everybody in the whole world. And I thought that was the most amazing thing from my perspective. So I got huge into that game. And another vivid memory I have of like the very early days of playing Asheron's Call before, like eventually I got my own account. But we were just playing on my roommates, and we would just like run around naked, and people would just come up to you and give you items and gear because they thought that you were just starting out and you'd probably gotten killed and lost your items and stuff. And so we thought that was some next level shit, running this like racket where we pretend to be naked and get people to give us charity. Anyway, so I might have to eventually do an episode on Asheron's Call. I know there's several people that were big into Asheron's Call. The vast majority of the community for Pantheon are like EverQuest or maybe like if they came on later, Warcraft and other games. But AC was just this little gem back in the day. Um, anyway, so after that, I was hooked, and I did manage to graduate, but Asheron's Call probably cost me maybe a decimal point or two on the GPA. And since then I've played a lot of different MMOs, City of Heroes, World of Warcraft, of course. Shout out to our Rainborn WoW Classic Guild. We're gonna get it going pretty soon. Lotro was another big one. Lord of the Rings Online. As far as personal life, I've been an educator, and I'm in the process of transitioning to web development. I've got a super secret Pantheon project that may or may not happen, just depending on I got some other things with higher priority, but I'm crossing my fingers that that'll happen. Anyway, so I guess that just about covers my background, and so I guess it's time to move on to our guests and the topic at hand. Today we're discussing the Shaman class with community members Vandraad and Optimus. All three of us are planning on maining a Shaman in Pantheon. It's one of the three primary healing classes, and the identity is based on a mix of controlling the elements, a little tribalism, and chronological mysticism. That's a term I made up to describe the Pantheon's sort of unique twist on the Shaman, where their consciousness exists outside of time to a degree, and they can, I'm quoting here, they can sense the threads of energy woven through Terminus's past, and they can determine the ancestry of a friend or foe and wield this knowledge in the form of powerful boons or frightful banes. It sounds kind of like a primitive version of 23andMe. It's kind of trippy, but personally, I like it. Like I said, I'm planning on maining it. So we're not going to go over all the individual skills, but just in general, the shaman are focused on healing over time, providing a variety of buffs, and debuffing through damage over time spells. That's the shaman in a nutshell. And we're going to start off our discussion off with Vandraad. So first off, how did you come to follow Pantheon? And then within that, within Pantheon, what specifically drew you to the shaman class?
So there was like a small press release or some sort of like article that appeared online about 5.5 years ago. Brad McQuaid posted this little article about a game that he was thinking about doing, and he didn't even have a name for it at the time. And I was like, oh, that's great. He's coming back from the Vanguard problems and wants to come back into the genre again. And it was just okay, just keep an eye out for this, keep following it. And then, through the course of the last 5.5 years, I've gradually moved into, a lot of support for this game.
Right.
And as to why to play a shaman, I played one in EQ1. That was my main class there. And in pretty much every game where you have a shaman class, it's a class that has a lot of different abilities that you can use in different situations. So you've got a lot of tools in your toolbox,
Right.
where a lot of classes are very singular focused, powerful tools, but a limited set. And being that one class that can bring lots of things to bear has always had an appeal. And looking at the descriptions of the shaman class in this game, it just follows that same pattern from what I had in EQ1.
Right. So are you typically a healing, or is it just what you were saying about having like being have a lot of stuff that you can do?
Yeah, it's a class that requires a lot of detailed attention. You can't play the game AFK. You can't play the class AFK. You've got a
Right.
lot of different things you have to do in combat, and that is a really strong attractor.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you were following Brad. We talked earlier, and you were huge into EverQuest, and so that's you were kind of aware of Pantheon. You said you were one of the very earlier supporters, so that's pretty cool. What about you, Optimus? How did you come to follow Pantheon, and what made you want to go with the Shaman?
I kind of found Pantheon by accident, maybe like 2 months ago or so. Actually,
Oh, really?
I played like EverQuest One a long time ago, and I've kind of been looking for MMOs. So I just randomly YouTube like upcoming MMOs for like 2019 or something, and I saw Pantheon on the list, and I started. It looked interesting because Brad McQuaid from EverQuest, and the video said it was going to be like a successor spiritually to EverQuest, and
Right.
EQ is like the only MMO that I ever actually really enjoyed or got into. Like I tried a bunch after it, and I kind of felt like a void in games since that experience, I guess, and I kind of been away from it for a
Yeah.
while.
I
And
don't think you're alone there.
yeah,
Definitely
no,
not
so
alone.
yeah, that's great because EQ, I don't know, it's just like such an immersive experience. I'm hoping that this is something like that, like an upgraded version, or like maybe fix some of the things that weren't great about EQ, but ever since
Yeah.
then, I've just been reading about the game and just kind of fall in love with it, so to speak. It just looks great, and I'm really excited to try. Hopefully,
Awesome.
get in there.
Glad you found it. What about the Shaman?
It's kind of like Van said. It's like I like classes that have like a lot of utility, and it's like no two people might play it the same way. It's like a lot you can do, all the different skills. It's just I really like having all that utility and access to playing different styles if I want. Like depending what the group I'm with needs, you can kind of fill that role if you want, and you can
Right.
solo if you want. You can group if you want. So I just like the versatility, and
Cool.
like he said, like you can't just AFK in combat. Like there's always something to be doing. I like to be very active when I'm playing, so it's like it's a good experience for me to try
Yeah.
a class like this.
Personally, I always tend to kind of gravitate towards a tanking or healing role, but I'm not a big fan of the holy theme. So like, kind of comes down to shaman types or druid types, and also like support as well. So shaman kind of fits in that role where it's a healing class. I generally like healing over time as well. So the healing over time and support role and the sort of the themes that I talked about earlier. I really like those. I played the shaman in WoW for a long time. It wasn't the first 6 months I was playing a hunter, but then ever since then, I've played WoW on and off, but I've been maining a shaman the whole time. Okay, so what about races? Do you guys know what race you're planning on?
Oh yeah.
And do you, or even if you don't have a single race, uh, what are you thinking as far as that goes?
I started off with the ogre in mind. I played a troll shaman in EQ1, and they didn't have a troll in this game, so I was like, ogre will be close enough. But then the scar really started to, I don't know, started to grow on me a little bit more. And I've always preferred to play a race that's going to have a much more difficult, path to walk in the world,
Mm-hmm.
hated by everybody else. Again, it brings a much more in depth gameplay. It's more difficult, it's more challenging. You have to be much more careful about where you are, who you talk to, how close you get to things. Um, and I'm hoping that it might see a few traits from like the EQ1 trolls, like maybe some health regen built in, that sort of thing. And also, it's going to be, I think, one of the less popular races to play, and having a class and a race which is not, seen everywhere gives you a better sense of being a little bit more unique, standing out from the crowd.
Right. What about you, Optimus?
Um, I kind of feel like I'm gonna be either an elf or an ogre. Um, if I was an elf, I'd probably just be for like vanity reasons, I guess, which sounds kind of stupid. But I thought about the scar. I'm just not sure I like the way the character looks, and I don't know if I'm gonna look at it the whole time I'm playing. But ogre
Yeah.
might be pretty good. I just don't know what the racial abilities are on any of it yet, so it's
Right.
not
Yeah,
set in stone
that
for
kind of
me.
makes it hard to judge, but you can form an opinion just on like the aesthetics of the races. So,
Yeah. Plus,
um,
I don't know if I want to be an evil race. Like I was always an evil race in every game I played, so maybe it's time to like be a good guy, so to speak,
yeah,
just for faction purposes, maybe. Just
yeah.
something different.
It's to me, it's coming down to the Archai or the Scar, and with the Archai, I really want to see the redone character models because when I look at the concept art, the Archai look amazing, but the Archai model that they've had in game is really old and it just looks bad.
I thought the
So
same thing.
um, I think the Archai their sort of characteristics as having different elements in their body and that come out through the cracks and their hands are going fits well with the shaman theme as well.
Hmm.
I've never liked the humanoid races. I like very non-humanoid races, or different looking. But when they redid the scar, I always thought the scar were kind of cool, and I've come around on the redo for the scar quite a bit. But what I really want to see with them is how they move in game because I like they kind of have this sort of primal posture, and I want to see how they move. And also what the updated model looks like in game. But I'm really quite intrigued by that. And
Like I was gonna
go
say,
ahead.
like hopefully not a fully upright walking posture. A bit more like splayed leg, a little bit bent over, a
Right.
much more aggressive stance than you would
Hmm.
see for, let's say, a human or even an elf.
Right. Um, and I I have some concern. Like I've never played EverQuest, so I'm not entirely sure if I want to jump on board with the evil race, and I guess I'll see an alpha maybe. I don't even know if they'll have their areas in alpha, so that might make that a little bit more tricky. But I want to find out exactly what I'm getting into with playing an evil race before I fully commit to it. Um, all right, so let's see. Ne- the next question that we're going to talk about is really like the meat of the discussion, and the question is, what's your ideal group? And this can incorporate like the composition of the group or the size of the group. Like, it can be small, 2 or 3 people, or a party or a raid. What type of role are you looking forward to, like, uh, fulfilling in that group? And what are the key skills that you're excited to use as part of that role? So we'll go to Van again.
Wow, that's a loaded
Yeah.
question.
And so, I know it's a big one.
Right.
So basically, I mean, it boils down like, what do you want to do? Like,
Right. So for me, okay, so the shaman is he's a melee force enhancer. Okay, I'm a force multiplier. So
mhm,
you look at all the buffs that are speed buffs, haste, strength, dexterity, agility fits much more towards a melee heavy group than a caster group. So for me, and I would say I want a melee heavy group. If you look at some of the synergies between classes, you'll see that the Dire Lord's abilities fit very well with the like the heal over times that you'll see in the Shaman class. So they pair well together.
right,
More so than let's say a shaman or a warrior. So Dire Lord, shaman, druid. Because again, there's a synergy between the druid and the shaman classes. Looking at the skill list, and then probably monk for pulling, or let's say ranger or a rogue, and at least one caster, probably a wizard. We don't know how important evacs are going to be or that sort of stuff, but yeah, just spread around. But then definitely a more heavy melee group. And again, my role is going to be, the I set the pace of the fight, how things are going to go, how quickly we move. Um, and you're setting everything up so that as soon as the first mob comes in, you slow it, you debuff it, you throw your heal over time on, and then the monk should be going out to get the next target, bring it in, park it, debuff it, finish off the first guy, switch to the second guy. So you're, as the primary healer, you're setting the pace for the group.
right.
And then I guess for skills, again, slow is always a big one. But to me, it's buffs and debuffs. I like being able to, be that force multiplier for a group
Right.
and make everybody's numbers bigger, make mobs' numbers smaller, and basically just keep the group alive.
Yeah, I think that the slow fits in with what you're saying about the Dire Lord, because the Dire Lord, their weakness is against physical damage that they're taking, and so with the Shaman being able to slow the target, you're to a degree nullifying the weakness that the Dire Lord has there.
Right.
As far as melee, I agree. There is definitely some synergy between the shaman and the melee, but when I look at that the crit buff, let me what was the name of that Primal Fury. So
Yeah.
the shaman has a buff. It's, I think, looking back at the tooltip from the game, I think it's a 2 minute cooldown and it lasts for 1 minute. And what it does is it's a stacking critical strike chance buff. So every time you get a critical strike, it increases your critical strike chance even more. And to me, that ability there would pair up amazingly well with a wizard, because the way the wizard works is their damage, they go through different phases, right? So they'll like ramp up their fire damage to insane levels, and then it ends up burning out their mana, and they have to regen it with arcane.
I think you might want to double check. That might be for melee only.
Is it melee only?
Yeah. Well, no, it says
No.
critical strike chance of physical and magical. So yeah, okay. I can see that.
Yeah.
So the reason why I would say that it's more applicable to a melee class than a caster class is casters typically are going to have a longer cast time in order to get a spell off. So if you've got a tank, let's say dual wielding, let's say a rogue, okay, very fast weapons, pretty high damage, the chance that he's going to have a critical attack is going to be greater over time per attack than a slower casting, caster. So you could seriously stack up some critical numbers, on a very fast attacking melee. Throw in haste on top of that, from either an enchanter and the shaman at the same time. Ooh, boy, you could see some serious numbers.
That's probably a pretty good point. They would likely be able to build it up faster. But on the flip side, I think once if the mage can build it up, because it does last a minute.
Right.
If that sorry, not the mage, the wizard. If the wizard can build it up to a good level while they're also hitting their peak output of that fire damage, it could be really quite insane what they could do.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to have to see, we're going to have to see what the numbers come out to, once we get into the game.
Any other skills that really jump out at you that you're like, I can't wait to use this?
The Age Walker's gift is going to be interesting. Once you die, you kind of stay around as a ghost, and you can interact with a few things like pulling your corpse away, that sort of thing. That has some interesting potential to it. And then there was the one where you can set a mark, and then you can it's like a personal gate. You can warp back to a preset location.
Oh yeah.
So
those two.
Ages.
Yeah, Walk of Ages. That could prove to be interesting.
Right. Those two are ones that I'd really love to see some confirmation of the details of how it work, how they work.
Right.
Is it time limited? Like you can only warp after somewhere within 2 minutes, or is it more of like a travel back to town type thing, or is it? I think I don't know if you guys are familiar with Warcraft, but the warlock there has like this gate that they can summon, and they can teleport back and forth to the gate. Mm-hmm. So, and that's more of like a combat thing. Like if we're in a raid and we need to move from this spot to this spot, I can just warp to my gate.
Well, and
but it'll be. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. And then there's the Hurry the Past healing ability. Healing over time abilities on you and your group members will instantly finish their duration, directly heal their target for the remaining amount, and then refresh those same heal over time spells.
Right.
So that could be a real, quick impulse of massive healing power. Especially when you've got that first engagement before you get slow in, or NPC knocks off some big massive nuke spell. You've got a potential there to really shove in a lot of healing really, really quick to get yourself back on track.
Right. Optimus, what about you? Ideal group size, composition, role, skills.
Well, I like soloing. I like like a duo. If I was a duo, I'd want a Dire Lord. And if I was in a 6-man group, I'd probably want a cleric, so he could be the man healer perhaps, and I could kind of be free to do what I want, whatever the situation called for. But I would want a cleric, a Dire Lord, probably an enchanter for some crowd control, and a wizard, either a ranger or a rogue, and a monk for pulling, I guess. Standard group, I suppose.
Okay. But, I like that you mentioned doing a duo group. Dire Lord probably. We mentioned some of the synergies there.
They just seem
the
to work
crit
well
buff. The crit buff will be awesome for the Dire Lord because because of how many things that they have in their arsenal that are based on critical strike.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see how that crit buff works out when it's actually like implemented. Just it seems like a really cool ability, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that'd be great with the Dire Lord. And it's interesting how you thought about it with the Wizard. Like I didn't think about that. I thought about it as a melee thing, but with the Wizard critting, that could be really powerful too. So if you're in a group with the Wizard, but again,
Yeah, like if you want to take it to an insane level, I mean, this may all get nerfed because it just seems ridiculous. But the Enchanter has an ability that well, hold on, let me look it up because I want to be precise here. But it's a cooldown. It says when you empower an ally's imagination, causing their abilities to have no resource cost for the duration. If by resource cost they mean mana,
No.
if you hit the mage, or sorry, I keep saying mage, wizard. If you give them their crit buff and you let them build it up, and then they stack up their fire damage, and then you hit them with the enchanter ability where they can cast with no mana.
Yeah.
I mean that's like a nuclear bomb going off, right?
Yeah, that sounds pretty powerful. It might be broken,
Yeah.
but maybe they'll get too much aggro, and maybe the mob will just kill them because
right. That's
right.
Make himself a target.
That's the limiting factor is the aggro. Of course, then you got the I think the warrior has something where they can taunt without cooldown, so they could just maybe sit there spamming taunt.
Spam taunt.
Yeah.
A lot of these abilities sound kind of broken. I haven't looked at everything yet, but it all seems pretty powerful.
Yeah. Everybody has something that seems broken, and so maybe that's where the balance comes from.
And when it says resources, if you start looking at the class descriptions, you'll see it says group role and then combat resource. So like the Dire Lord, his resource is essence. So that enchanter ability, I look at that and say, okay, whatever abilities he uses that uses essence would no longer have a cost.
Right.
But
it very well could be that.
Mana for something, that would still, have a cost to it.
That makes sense.
That's why I clarified. I said like if this applies to mana, because
but again, like the druid, it says combat resource mana. So who knows?
Yeah. Key skills for you, Optimus?
I really like the ancient focus passive where you just regen mana and health as if you're not in combat. That seems really interesting, especially if you're like in a duo situation with somebody. Not much downtime with that one. So that's probably my favorite one, I think. And there's a few of the offensive things I like that are pretty good, but I don't know how they all work with the Banes and stuff, so I'm not sure how they stack, And,
right.
I'm not sure all of them off the top of my head, to be honest. Some of the passive ones. Part the veil, but you have to as like a sacrifice yourself, I guess, to bring somebody else back to life. I'm not 100% sure how that works.
Yeah. There's a lot of uncertainty about part the veil, and we can maybe get into rezzing a little bit later. But those are somewhat related. Anything else?
I like the hurry the past ability that I mentioned earlier. That seems pretty interesting. You immediately finish the heals and reapply or whatever. That sounds pretty cool. There's just overall, I like the whole package. I'm not sure if any particular skills other than those really stand out the most to me.
Cool. I'm in basically the same boat as you guys are, where like my ideal role would be as an off healer, right? So with either a cleric or a druid being the main healer, and buffing and debuffing, and keeping some heal over time, rolling on the tank, filling out group. If there's a lot of group damage, because that's really probably the shot as far as the healing goes, where they excel the best is on group wide damage. We have a lot of we can spread heal over times around, and we also have a lot of group wide healing. The skill that, and we can maybe discuss this if you guys have an opinion on it, but the Keeper of Elemental Mysteries is a passive ability that I really like. And what it does is it gives you a percent bonus to healing for each elemental school that you have and active on an offensive target. So, we have all these. A lot of our debuffs are, well, some of them are just straight up debuffs, like the attack speed debuff. But we've also got several like damage over time spells that have debuffs as part of them. Like we have a nature, like a poison damage over time that makes them more vulnerable to nature damage. There's a fire damage over time that makes them more vulnerable to fire-based attacks. Just so, and each one of those debuffs is one of, I think, like six or no, there's 6 different schools: water, fire, earth, wind, animus, and ancestral. So for each category that you have at least one debuff up, you get a stacking percent bonus to your healing. So the reason I like this a lot is it seems like sort of a build enabling passive, right? And so if you have the shaman that's functioning as the off healer, stack up a bunch of debuffs and damage over time spells, and then maybe you can just keep like 1 or 2 heal over times rolling. But even though you're only casting a couple of heals here and there, they're going to be super powerful because you have all these debuffs going that are empowering those heals. But I've seen on the forums 1 or 2 people complaining about it, and their perspective is that it's going to be a requirement, right? So they say, well, if we're expected to have this stacked up so high in order to be competitive for healing, that's a negative. So, we can talk about. Well, let's just get into it. Do either of you have a take on that?
For me, it's going to depend upon how much money, how much mana am I going to have to spend on all of those elemental abilities, whatever, versus how much percentage of healing increase am I going to see for that. If I have to spend so much more mana than what I'm capable of regenerating quickly enough for a who knows what percentage of healing ability, it's not going to be worth it.
Right. Yeah, that's what I said.
You have to look at the fact, how long is a fight going to last? If that fight is a 45-second, 1-minute fight, okay, and I want to have the maximum healing, I need I need to cast 5 or 6 spells to get the maximum healing. That's a lot of time. So While I'm casting all those, I also can't be casting healings. I can't be casting some other things. And by the time I do all that, the fight could be over and my tank could be dead.
Right, yeah. Like mana is definitely needs to be considered as a sort of a limiting factor. And I mean, you might look at your debuffs and say, well, this debuff is worth using regardless of the healing bonus, like the melee slow, right? So I want to keep that up because it's just good to have anyway. And the healing bonus that I get from the Keeper of Elemental Mysteries is just gravy on top of that. But if I'm a solo healer, like you said, if I try to keep all those debuffs going to get a bonus to my healing, I'm going to run out of mana, and then I've shot myself in the foot.
Yeah, that sounds all right. I was also concerned how long the average fight is, because if a fight's 30 seconds, if you're pulling like a lot of mobs and they're going fast, the debuffs aren't even really going to matter that much. Well, it'll matter the debuffs, but the impact of the ability might not be that significant.
Right.
It might be good for like raids, like a raid mob or for like
raids.
A long time. You can get everything stacked on top of it or whatever, and it's up there for a while. Could be good.
But that you bring up a good point with, or both of you did, with the length of the fight. But something that also is a point for the Dire Lord is they have an interesting ability called Splatter, and what it does is I think it's has some RNG in it because it says you have a chance to you attack your target, and if you get the right RNG roll, it'll spread the debuffs that are on that target to other targets near it. So let's say you spend a bunch of mana to stack up these debuffs on the first target, and they're only halfway done as the mob is dying. But if you can have the Dire Lord pull the other target up next to it and then splatter, all of a sudden you got those debuffs for free bumped onto the second target. So you just doubled your mana efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty powerful combo.
Right.
I like that. I didn't know about that. That's pretty cool.
And if you once you get into a raid situation, if you got, let's say, 2 shamans in a group, depending upon, if does this apply only to the healing abilities of the shaman that cast it, or does it apply to, other shaman? You could have somebody casting the debuffs while the other person's casting the heals. Remains to be seen. And again, in a raid fight, presumably those events are going to be much longer, so it would probably be in your best interest to stack as many of these as possible to further increase your healing abilities. But at the same time, you're also going to have other, clerics and druids and other whatnots hanging around, and you may not have to rely upon your healing to such a high degree that casting all those other spells is necessarily going to be worth it. It's all going to come down to how much of a percentage am I going to see versus how much mana and time is it going to cost me.
Right. And the other factor that we didn't talk about was with the limited action set, that's what some people have been calling basically the fact that you're limited to 12 abilities. That the total number might change, but you've got 12 ability slots. So if you use half of those for your debuffs, then with only 6 left, you might have to drop some abilities that have a lot of utility, like maybe the gate ability that we mentioned, or some buffs like the Primal Fury buff. There's a attack speed buff. You're not going to be able to fit in all of your debuffs and all the buffs you want and all of your healing abilities, and have multiple ranks of the healing abilities so that you can use a more mana efficient one. You just can't fit everything in there.
Right. And if you start looking at some of the synergies too, this may or may not necessarily be something you would want to utilize, because if you look at the druid, they've got their Oaken regeneration line. Okay, it increases the healing percentages of heals that land on that target. So if you've got a druid in your group and he puts Oaken regen on your tank, your heals are already going to be that much better.
Right.
And at no mana cost to yourself. Then if your tank is a Dire Lord, I think one of his abilities increases the healing effects that land on him. So that's even multiplying it even further. Those things are probably going to stack. So depending upon how your group composition is set up, it may not be worth the mana cost to bother.
Right. Yeah, you get into the weeds as far as how their mathematical formulas are going. Are they going to make it where it's a more healing, where it's always whatever you would be healing at, it's 25% more? Or is it just another 25% stacked up? Like if you already have 100%, well, going from 200% to 225% isn't as impactful as 100% to 125 percentage-wise. Well, like I said, that's getting into the weeds. We don't really have to go there, but it's interesting that none of us, when we said what our ideal group is, said I want to be the solo healer pumping out heals, keeping everybody alive by myself. So
that doesn't appeal to me.
I don't mind it. I mean, I've done it as a shaman in EQ1, once you got to a certain level, had enough AA points, it was very easy to keep, just a normal group alive
Right.
pretty much anywhere we wanted to go. It's all going to
So
depend upon how many people in my guild are online, who wants to do what, and if you've got enough DPS, your time to kill is going to necessarily be lower, so you may not have to heal as much. So it may be very easy to keep a group healed depending upon your group composition.
yeah,
True.
the I do find it kind of appealing. Like I said, I think the most effective role is going to be the one that we've been talking about. But I think trying to solo heal as a shaman, and keep in mind that uh, the the people behind Pantheon have said that their goal is to make each healer a capable primary healer or solo healer. But that there will be different strengths and weaknesses, and the shaman being very heal over time focused is going to struggle with burst damage. Although we do have some interesting abilities in our toolkit to deal with that. Primarily, we have this one called Gate of Forgotten Arrows, and what it does is you cast it on a group member, ideally the tank, you would think, and they can no longer move, but all damage against that target is delayed for X seconds. We don't know, maybe 10 or so. I'm just guessing. And after that time, the total damage that the target took is split evenly among the group. So, that's like if you're that's definitely something. If you were going to try to solo heal, you want to have that tool in your tool belt, because aside from that, you don't really have anything that like a cleric has where they can just spam a huge heal over and over on a target to deal with burst damage. But just in general, I think solo healing as a shaman could be really fun and challenging because of the limitations and trying to use your toolkit to overcome those limitations and use strategy and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I think it'll be fun, challenging, but not necessarily the most ideal position for the shaman.
You're going to have to keep a lot of balls in the air to play it properly in order to be as effective as you possibly can.
Right.
Because order of the fight is going to be hugely important. Do you get should then slow? Do you slow first, then heal? Trying to figure out that process, that order that you're going to follow can make or break a group.
Right. Anything else about group roles? What about I think we briefly mentioned rating, but do you guys think? I think the rates. Let's assume the bigger rate size, 24. How many?
That's not big.
Yeah, hopefully they'll ramp it up
I want to
at
see
some
40
point.
or 36 at least.
40 does seem. Yeah, I
Well,
agree
multiples of 6 anyway, so 36 and 42.
there. But do you guys feel like Shaman will be in a good place as far as rating?
Oh, it's going to be a required class.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it'd be required. The slows would be too valuable on those mobs and those raids.
Right. Yeah, I think the slows, the heal over time, being a very efficient way to deal with group damage.
Yeah, definitely.
And also the buff. You can't forget those buffs. I think I'm not 100% sure. I know we have a couple of buffs for resistances, which as everybody knows, like that can be a pretty big deal in a raid.
Yeah, definitely. It's always important.
So yeah, I think we'll be in a pretty good spot when it comes to raids. All right, on to a sort of a smaller, well, not necessarily smaller, but potentially controversial. I don't know what you guys' positions are. We haven't discussed this yet. The pet. Where does people stand on the pet? Because there's been some grumbling. I read the forums and people here and there say there's too many pets. The druid has a pet, shaman's got a pet, summoner's got a pet, rangers summon things, enchanters they can charm. Uh, the wizard has a familiar. Too many pets, and the shaman's the one is the pet that needs to go. Shaman should not have pets. Agree? Disagree?
I until I see it and how it works, I can't really say.
Okay.
My only concern with the pet or any pet is how much control will we have over that pet? For those who played EQ1, and you were on a raid, the first rule was kill all your pets.
Yeah, I was
Because
the pet class,
an
I know.
AoE hits it and the pets just run off. Pathing was terrible.
Right.
I can't count the number of raids that wife because of us. So
Yeah.
if the pet is something that I can absolutely control, if I say stay here no matter what happens, and the pet will do that, okay, I'm fine. If the
Right.
pet is an insignificant amount of DPS and it's more of just a visual thing, get rid of it. It's irrelevant.
Yeah.
If
We
I'm
should.
soloing, how will that pet take damage? Is it going to be tanky enough? If it's too tanky, then it makes the shaman class too easy to solo. It will take away,
Right.
somebody, grouping with another person. If it's a pet that dies in 3 hits, well then what's the point? So
Yeah.
until I see what that pet does, I really can't say one way or the other.
And we should say, according to the website, the pet will be getting some kind of abilities that they can use. Whether those are just damage abilities, but I'm kind of assuming that it's going to have some utility built into it, like a snare, maybe some kind of debuff or something like that. Um, anyway, Optimus, do you have a position on the pet?
When I first decided I wanted to be a shaman, I didn't even realize that it had a pet to go with it. Because I'm not really looking to play a pet class. So again, like I don't know much about it. Like I'm kind of neutral on it. I don't care one way or the
Uh-huh.
other. It depends how it's going to be implemented in the game. But I
Right.
don't think I don't want it to be like a class defining thing. Like
Right. I don't think
that's
it
not what I
is
want.
going to be. Um,
No, again, it all depends what they make it do. Like for me, they could either take it out or leave it in. I don't know how much I care one way or the other, to
yeah.
be honest. But there do seem to be a lot of pets. I'm not like outraged by everybody having a pet for whatever reason, but
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how they're gonna implement the pet.
For me, what I've said about this is they can take the pet from my cold dead hands. Uh, I like it a lot. Like I agree. I don't think it's going to be a class defining thing. I think it'll be something that you can probably. Well, this kind of gets into another issue of with the with the limitation to 12 abilities. Will you be able to summon the pet and then swap out the ability so that you've got you know that slot back for something else that you can use? Will the pet disappear or will it stay around and you can use it? Um,
Yeah, I
but
wouldn't expect that they would have the pet disappear. I mean, that has. I mean, even EQ1, you can summon the pet and then get rid of the spell and memorize something else, and
okay,
the pet would stay there. I don't think
yeah,
that they would incorporate something like that.
yeah. I think it'll probably be something most useful for like a when you're duoing or small group of three or something like that. Um,
That could be
or
good. Like if they
potentially,
kept it that
it
way.
depends on um, what the abilities that they give it are. But I
Right.
think
What is it going
I
to do?
right.
Is it
Now,
even going to be a
if it's
summon? Or is it gonna be like a constant? Is it like always there? Like the way I read it, it's like a pet, and then you like at level 10 you have a quest for it and stuff. So it seems like it might be actually pretty important, lore
Yeah,
wise, anyway.
yeah. I mean, it could provide you with some buffs or something like that. Just like a little pet bro buff, maybe some regen or something. But um, PV, I'm not sure what PvP is going to be like in this game. but it does seem like it could be something pretty useful if that's the case, especially like uh, a snare, like to bite the ankle, snare snare your enemy. That could be really useful in PvP, and also just interrupting people. Um, could be a place for the pet to shine there. As far as everybody has a pet, I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, there are a lot of pets, but there's also a lot of huge variance in what those pets are and what they do. Like the druid one is I mean, I would almost not really call it a pet and just like a visual thing, right? It's because it's not going to be attacking. You just like you're channeling some abilities through it, but I don't think it's going to be targetable by enemies. It just kind of sits there and you tell it to do stuff and it does it, but there's no interacting with it.
Kind of like the
And
wizard's familiar.
yeah, like same thing there. Like the familiar just sits there, it doesn't do anything. With the ranger, their pet abilities are also basically just abilities that have visuals that happen to be an animal. So in terms of mechanics, they aren't really pets. Um, anyway, so uh, last main topic here. What are your concerns for the shaman class?
Oh wow, that's an open-ended question. Um, it to me, it's gonna come down to how well can I do my job compared to that of a cleric when it comes
Right,
down to healing. You know, um, my concern is that with a cleric having an XP res and none of the other priests having one, that could possibly make druids and shamans, secondary healers for people looking for groups. I want to avoid the whole, holy trinity that we saw in EQ1. Um, Other than that, it's gonna come down to how well do heal over times work compared to direct heals. Even when you take into account, the buffs, the debuffs, and and some of the the synergies between various classes. If I cannot deal with spike DP, spike damage, then people will quickly realize that and will not want a shaman in their group if that shaman is going to be the only healer. And if we can't be the only healer, then we shouldn't be a priest class. We should be a utility class.
right,
Yeah, I
and
guess
that
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. I mean, if that turns out to be the case, that's not what Visionary Realms has said that their goal is. So, um, of course, there's a lot of gray area, right? Like there might be some content where we can't handle the burst damage, and you need a cleric for that. But that might be 5% of the content,
But if
and
it's
in that,
5% that you have to go through
right,
in order to, let's say, complete a quest or do something else, then you've now basically locked yourself out of that content.
except for the fact that you can have a cleric and a shaman, and the shaman in as an off healer is providing a ton of value and is very desired. You
Yeah,
know,
and a lot of I also look at this from the point of view of if you are a single shaman, you're not in a guild. Okay, you're just playing the game by yourself. You play kind of casually. How what does your class bring to a group that people will then be attracted to and say, hey, we definitely want this shaman in our group, even if we don't have another priest class.
right,
If you're somebody who's in a guild, all of those arguments go out the window because the guild will do what it needs to do to keep everybody engaged, everybody in groups. Yeah, you'll take two clerics or a druid and a shaman, and they'll have two priests in groups, not a problem, because they know that it's to the benefit of the guild. But a
right.
single person on their own, a little bit difficult, a little bit more difficult of a path.
True. Optimus, what do you think
Uh,
about the concerns about
well,
main
having
healing burst
also
damage?
also being like EQ veteran, I have the same concerns that he has. I don't want to be looking for a group and people say you're not a cleric, we don't want you type of situation. That would be my only concern, not being able to keep up healing wise if I had to be the only healer group, or not
Yeah.
being relevant heals in a raid or something. But I'm not too concerned with that because I think if you play the class well enough, you people will know and they would probably still take you anyway. And like I
Right.
said, I'm going to be in a guild, so I don't plan on not being able to find a group. But maybe he said for that solo shaman out there who's not in a guild, it might be a little difficult in the early goings for him.
Right.
And the other thing is how well the shaman heals may change over time. You could find yourself in, let's say, like a gap, a couple levels where your healing abilities haven't kept up with the content that you're going through, and a cleric is a little bit better. But later on, your spells have kind of caught up and superseded that of a cleric, so you're now more desirable. The EQ1 shaman started off almost incapable of keeping a group healed, but much further into the game, it became very easy for a shaman to heal a full group and even keep a full group healed, an off tank group healed during raids. So, we may see that same type of path that evolves over time. You start off weak, you get a little bit better, and more tools go into the toolbox, things that you can apply to different situations, and it comes out in the end that yes, you are all exactly equal. You just do it by different means.
Right. Uh, when we were chatting before we started recording, we mentioned the res situation a little bit. I think we might have briefly mentioned it earlier, but uh, thoughts about the way that the shaman reses the apparent. I mean, now there could they've said that there are other abilities that haven't been listed yet, so it's possible that there will be a way to res in combat without dying for the shaman. But also the lack of a experience return on the res. Any concerns about those, Optimus?
Um, Not really. I mean, unless it's gonna prevent me from getting a group, that's my only concern. Like, I don't really need every class to have a res. Like, I feel like you might make the classes too similar. Like, I don't mind it being a cleric thing, but that's just what I'm used to. So I could
Right.
definitely be wrong on that opinion, but
Yeah.
I don't need it to be like a class thing. I don't necessarily see shaman resing. I've always just thought it was a cleric thing, so I'm okay not having an XP res. I mean, it's not great, but that's okay not having it.
Yeah. I think um, something that can also help out with the shaman being one of our weaknesses being the lack of an in combat res, unless you happen to die and then you can res in that little period that you have where we're in the ghost phase. Um, but the paladin, if you make friends with the paladin and you're rolling with them, if somebody pulls aggro and dies, the paladin has a in combat res. We haven't seen the necro yet, but I hope that the necro has some kind of in combat res ability. So maybe by adjusting your group composition would be a way to address that limitation.
Yeah, that's possible. Again, I look at this from the standpoint of a single player not in a guild. Um, if if
Right.
if if upon death the XP loss is so significant that an XP returning res is perceived to be an absolute requirement, then the shaman and druid are very heavily penalized. But
That's very well
if
put.
if just returning to your corpse returns some amount of XP, and the XP res returns a little bit more, you still have lost some XP. It should be a painful amount. It should be noticeable. But if the difference between just returning to your body and getting a little bit XP back or getting an XP res is just a little bit, I don't see it as a major problem. But
Yeah, I agree with you.
if it is very, very noticeable, it puts the shaman and the druid at a very strong disadvantage for that single player.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we were talking earlier, and you were telling me about how in EverQuest a player would die, and there would be a cleric available that had a 60%.
And they say, nope, don't res me. Nope, I'll wait for a 90%.
Yeah, they would wait hours.
95, whatever it was.
Yeah. So if that's the case, but swap in the shaman for the 60% res, and get out of here, shaman. I'm gonna get a cleric to come heal me. I think hopefully that won't be the case, because that could definitely be a problem. Any other concerns?
No, not really. The res thing's the only one.
Yeah. The one thing, I don't know how much I want to get into it, but the buffs are a big part of the shaman class, and there's a lot of debate and uncertainty about exactly how buffs are going to work. So I want to see how, how that works out. Curious about stacking buffs. As far as I'm aware, the shaman is the only one that has the resistance buffs, but I could be wrong there. So
I thought druid had at least something.
Do they?
I think you're right, though. I think it's just the shaman has resistance buffs.
Yeah. But those might be.
The druid does have some type. So they've got the grizzly's resistance, which is less likely to be stunned by physical attacks.
Right.
But it doesn't look like they've got anything that says, okay, you're less likely to take damage from fire-based spells or cold-based spells. I think this is basically the sole purview of the shaman.
Yeah. So it's a big hot button issue, but the issue of multi-boxing and having buff bots. So if there's a bunch of people that have a second account and they can level up a shaman, and then they run around and let's say they're a cleric and they're in a group, and then they just have the seventh members, their alt shaman that's following them around and giving them all the buffs that the shaman has. Is that going to be like at the higher levels of play? Are they going to say, well, I'm looking for a group, I'm a shaman, and they say, well, sorry, we're going to take a cleric, and then have some AFK bot providing all the buffs that you bring, so we don't actually need to have one in the group. Like, that is a bit of a concern. There's some ways that they could maybe deal with that by the mechanics of how the buffs are applied and stuff, but like that's a huge discussion.
But that was possible in EQ1, and I didn't, having played that game for 9 years, I didn't really see that as something that happened a lot. You didn't see boxed shamans just following a group around on the outside of the group. What caused the problem was the fact that buffs lasted for hours. So you could go to Plane of Knowledge, somebody does a series of mass group buffs, and wow, now you've got 15 buffs that last you the next 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
So
it was a huge issue in Astron's Call, and a big part of that problem was because not only did you have multi-botting, but you also had like actual botting with programs that would run. So people would set up buff bots and just leave it running on their computer, and you could come up and you could whisper the character melee, and they would cast all these buffs on you that lasted an hour, and just like it made a huge difference for your character. And then you could run around solo and kill stuff. So it But
Some portion of the population is going to do that. There's no way you
yeah,
can stop it. And I don't think it's an issue for people in guilds. Again, solo players, I think they're going to have more of an issue with this, where a guild, somebody in the group goes, "No, we've already got a shaman in our group because of our guild member or whatever." Uh, I think that one of the great social attractions, things that keeps groups together and keeps people interacting with them, is the ability to help out others, and doing that via buffs is a good way to do it. So I would hope that they would not remove the ability to cast buffs, on others, because if they do, I would say fine, no outside group healing either.
yeah.
If you're
And
gonna
I
say, if
think
I can't buff that group to be nice, then no, you can't heal that group to be nice.
yeah, and some if you I don't know how much stock you can put into it, but some of the wording on the buffs do say members of your group. So it's possible that some of these, like the resistance ones, say members of your group, whereas other ones uh, don't. And of course, there's also the short term buffs. Uh, so
Well, again,
that
I think the wording for that is just more of a, this is a group centric thing, and so they're writing the
right.
language in the terms of group. But I don't think that there
You
would
do
be an
see some of
issue
them say
with,
ally though. So, but like I said, I mean,
yeah.
I wouldn't bet a huge amount on it.
I think we've
Um,
seen in the streams too that people have buffed outside of groups. I could be mistaken, but I think that has been a thing.
yeah.
So
All
no, I
right.
don't I
Well,
don't think they're going to stop allowing people to cast buffs outside of groups. That would
yeah.
just
I
be
don't. I
that
don't
would
think
just
they
be a
are like
problem.
overall. I think you might see some. They're limited to group, and that can also get into the effects of raid composition, where if you have buffs that are limited to group, that encourage you to bring more than one of that class. Uh, whereas like on the for the druid, they have their the way their buffing is work. The way their buffs work is they're limited to one buff on an individual player, right?
Yeah, those
So
traits.
right, um, so if you bring two druids, well now you can get two buffs per player. Whereas for the shaman, it might be more of like a lot of their buffs are group wise. So you put a shaman in one group, they get the buffs. You have to get another shaman for another group to get them the buffs.
Yeah, it remains to be seen if those traits will allow it to be stacked from different druids, or if it's the fact that the trait is active would then block any other trait from being active, even if cast from another druid.
Yeah,
Because because
buff
again, you
stacking.
could potentially stack. What is it? One, two, three, four, 7 different traits.
Yeah, stacking is also an interesting thing. Thinking specifically about the crit buff, I know the Dire Lord has a stance that I think gives them like 25% crit chance, and the Warrior I think has a buff that also does 25%. So you get those two together, that's 50%, and then you throw I'm sure there's probably a cap on it or something, but it does seem like, and of course these numbers will probably be tweaked, so I guess
Yeah.
it's probably not worth worrying about it too much. But there's a lot. Point is, I guess there's a lot of crit buffs to go around.
Well, and it does come down to what is your base chance of a crit. Is it 1%, half a percent, 5%? When you start doing buffs, are you doing multiplicative or additive?
Right.
Um, I have asked, on the forums several times, I think on the shaman threads, yeah, when you're talking about, X percent, is it additive or multiplicative? And I think
Yeah.
Joppa has said several times that they're looking at additive. So if your base chance is 10% and you get a buff that adds 10%, your base chance now is 20%.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine that it works that way. If like Path of Exile, is a multiplicative one, and so you might have like your melee weapon determines your crit chance, and it might be like 8% or something. But then, in order to stack your crit chance up to a significant level, you have to get bunches and bunches of like 20, 50% chance. So you might stack it to like 600% crit chance, but it's again that's being multiplied by a small base chance.
Right.
So, anything else before we kind of wrap it up? It's been an hour. I think we've covered quite a lot. I think it's been some pretty interesting discussion.
I can't think of anything else.
No, I actually learned a lot from you guys that I wasn't even aware of. To be honest, it was pretty informative for me as well.
I'm glad you thought that. I've really enjoyed getting to know you guys a little bit. I think it's pretty cool that Optimus, you just found the game, having been a big EverQuest player back in the day.
Yeah.
And
very excited. Hopefully it comes out soon.
Yeah. The so newsletter. Hopefully, I know it's not this month. They've confirmed that the new character models aren't going to be in the newsletter that's happening next week. But hopefully for the August one, we'll see this. 'Cause I've just been like dying to see the new Archai and Scar models. Man, I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, I think really can't wait to see the new Scar.
Yeah, you said I want to see how they walk too, because like the way their legs are designed. I'm curious.
They changed that. They got rid of
really?
they got rid of the digigrade leg and went to a plantar grade leg, which is the same leg as like a human. Yeah, because they said the knee went backwards, and I actually had to make a post on the forums that showed that it's not a backwards knee. It's just the length of the different bones is different, so it makes it look that way. But again, their point is we would have to stretch the models for boots and redo the textures for all of that, and they didn't, and it was just a waste of effort. I'm like, okay, I can understand that.
Makes sense.
But it just kind of ruins the the uniqueness of the class.
Definitely.
If you look back, there's a newsletter from earlier this year. I think it was one of the first months of the year, where they have a section about the Scar redesign, and they have a lot of concept art of the new Scar. And at first, it's I think with a lot of things, when you're used to something looking one way, and then you see a change, there's some resistance to it, and I felt that. But like over time, I've really come around to the new Scar, and if you see like in some of the drawings where it shows their full body, I just love like that sort of like I used the term earlier, but sort of a primal posture that they have. And if you read their lore, which is all the lore that they have for the different races is really cool. That's actually what drew me to the game in the first place, and I pledged just like reading the different race, the backgrounds for the different races. But the Scar are pretty cool, and yeah, I want to see it in action. I think that might tip me over the edge to commit to the Scar.
The Scar reminds me a lot of all of the mobs from the Gates of Discord and Omens of War expansion in EQ1. With the scars and the bones sticking out and the very kind of like Hellraiser sort of visage, and then also the Yuzong Vong from the Star Wars expanded universe, with ritualized tattoos and scarrings and stuff like that. But
yeah,
evil race, go around, kill everybody, let them all sort it out.
It's awesome, man. If you read into them, they have. If you're familiar with like the Alien series, how they had the Alien Queen, and she would birth out the little aliens. That's how the Scar reproduce. They have like a queen,
nice.
And yeah, they're pretty mental.
That sounds kind of crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah, check out the lore sections on the Scar's really cool. The Dark Mirror are probably my favorite.
I read the Dark Mirror's lore. That was interesting. I didn't read the Scar one, so I'm gonna have to check that out based on your description.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess we'll call it there. Thanks again, guys, for
Sure. Thank you very much for the
stopping
invite. I
by.
appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. Like I said, it was interesting and informative for me as well. So good.
All right. See you guys.
See
Take
ya.
care.
Cool.